Harmonically, with the exception of Sonny Rollins, he was the most sophisticated tenor saxophonist we've had. Horace Silver said he was one of the most knowledgeable horn players he's ever worked with. Who is Hank Mobley? Here on Big on Bebop. He was born Henry Mobley on July 7, 1930 in Eastman, Georgia, but he was raised in Elizabeth, New Jersey, near Newark. He described himself as coming from a musical family and spoke of his uncle playing in a jazz band. As a child, Mobley played the piano. When Mobley was 16, an illness kept him in the house for several months. His grandmother bought him a saxophone to help him pass the time. He tried to enter a music school in Newark, but wasn't accepted since he wasn't a resident. So he taught himself theory and harmony from books that his grandmother had bought for him, while also teaching himself to play the tenor saxophone. At age 19, he started to play with local bands, and months later worked with Dizzy Gillespie and Max Roach. Roach introduced him to the New York jazz scene in 1951. Over the next 2 years, Mobley began composing and recording tunes of his own. He played with multiple R&B bands during this period, and then for 2 weeks in 1953 with the Duke Ellington Orchestra. In April of 1953, he was hired by Max Roach to play on the album released as Max Roach Quartet featuring Hank Mobley. He later appeared on 2 Roach sessions recorded in 1957 and 1958 for Marcy Records. Shortly after working with Roach, he began working regularly with another drummer and band leader, Art Blakey. He and Blakey took part in one of the earliest hard bop sessions alongside pianist Horace Silver, bassist Doug Watkins, and trumpeter Kenny Dorham. The results of these sessions were released as Horace Silver and the Jazz Messengers. At this point, the band was a collective, sometimes appearing at recording under the names of either Silver or Blakey. Mobley was also in the Jazz Messengers for the recording of the live album At the Cafe Bohemia, and he appeared on Columbia Records' studio album The Jazz Messenger. Mobley used the Jazz Messengers rhythm section as his backing band for his 1955 Blue Note Records debut, Hank Mobley Quartet, when the Silver-Watkins-Blakey version of the Jazz Messengers split up in 1956. Mobley continued working with Silver for a short time, appearing on Silver's Blue, 6 Pieces of Silver, and the Stylings of Silver. Mobley worked for a brief period with Blakey, a few years later rejoining the drummer's band, which was then called Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers. In the spring and summer of 1959, he also hired Blakey to play on 2 of his Blue Note solo albums recorded in 1960. Mobley recorded steadily during the second half of the 1950s for Blue Note Records. A series of albums received critical acclaim: Pecking Time, Soul Station, Roll Call, and Workout. He worked with Lee Morgan, Donald Byrd, Art Farmer, Kenny Dorham, Jackie McLean, Pepper Adams, Milt Jackson, Sonny Clark, Bobby Timmons, Herbie Hancock, Wynton Kelly, Paul Chambers, and Philly Joe Jones, among others. He played with Thelonious Monk in 1958, and then back with Art Blakey in 1959. He played with Dizzy Reese in 1960, Miles Davis from 1961 to 62, as well as recording an impressive series of LPs for Blue Note with his own groups throughout the 60s. He lived in Europe from 1968 to 1970 and then came back to the U.S., co-leading a band with Cedar Walton in the late 70s, when a lung problem rendered him all but inactive. Mobley became addicted to heroin in the late 1950s, and in 1958 was in prison. He continued to struggle with his drug addiction during the 1960s. A long-time smoker, Mobley was forced to retire in the mid-1970s due to lung problems. He also had problems with homelessness in his later years and struggled to stay in touch with his fellow musicians. He died of pneumonia in 1986, having also suffered from lung cancer. Hank Mobley was an instrumental part of the hard bop style of the late 1950s. Mobley's style was distinguished by a mellower tonal approach which had many critics overlooking his subtlety and harmonic sophistication and considerable talent for structure, both as a player and a writer. Hank Mobley, a giant bebop tenor saxophone.